Let's pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for this day. We give you thanks for the opportunity to gather together in fellowship and to study your word, and that you give your word to us so that we might know you better. We ask that you would open our eyes and ears, our hearts and minds to your presence through the Holy Spirit in the scriptures we read today. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so
Just don't answer it.
we have an opening question, and that is, a statement and then a question. So doctors and pastors to some degree, and therapists often know when someone comes to them for a problem, what they talk about is maybe not the real problem or the only problem. And so, somebody feels pain and they get into the doctor's office and they discover that that's only a symptom of something much deeper that's going on, whether that's medical or psychological. And if somebody comes to knock on the pastor's door or the therapist's door, that kind of fear or depression or guilt is often a second or third order anxiety to some root feeling. And you can't get to that without kind of peeling back the layers of it. And so, and they end up kind of like the position we end up with in Revelation 6 today. The person observing finally plucks up the courage to go to the doctor to wait and see what happens in the throne room here, and thinks, well, now I'm going to feel good and happy again, and this is going to put me back on track. And so often in the moment, we have to disappoint them because in order to get to the root of the problem sometimes, and to get to a lasting cure, you have to kind of peel it back. When have you felt this way before? What are you most afraid of? Why are you afraid in this moment? And typically when that happens, the person answering the questions gets very uncomfortable because I didn't know I was going to go into all that. I came to talk about this argument I'm having with my spouse, and now we're talking about things that happened in my childhood, and why do we have to go there? We don't need to bring those up. That was a long time ago. But the reality is sometimes we need to, unless we can lay out the problems in their fullness and fully transparent, no healing can take place. We're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on something, on a surface symptom for that. And that's kind of the same in scripture and what we're looking at in Revelation 6, unless all the ills of the world, the brokenness, the sinfulness is brought out, unless it's shown in all its true colors and graphically and put on display and allowed to do its worst, it cannot be overthrown. Unless the four horsemen ride out, and we'll get to that in a minute, and do what they have to do, the scroll cannot be read. And so in order to affect lasting healing or lasting redemption in the world, we have to have all these other things happen so that we can see the root, not just the root cause, but the eventual effect of that in order for God to be able to redeem us in our own lives and the world. So that's the groundwork. Wanted to invite you to share on a more personal level. Have you or someone you ever gone for help for a particular symptom or problem only to discover there was a more serious underlying issue?
Well, obviously, from a physical standpoint, when Austin had, most of his early symptoms were very, I won't say benign. They were not major, just, gee, what's wrong? You got a little headache. Of course, he had migraines there also, but they tend to send you in the wrong direction. And it was only when he went to a neurologist because of the headaches that in one of the tests that he was putting Austin through, that he decided there may be something more threatening than what they'd been looking at. And obviously, that was the case. That's it.
Anyone else?
My brother, my brother got real sick and went in the hospital, and they did tests on him. And 10 days later, he died in the hospital.
Mm,
They said he was eaten up with cancer.
mm,
So you never,
yeah, you never know. That's hard. Something similar happened to my grandmother, not that quickly, but she was losing weight and a little confused. And they kind of thought it was just the start of dementia. And it turned out it was pretty advanced cancer. And she only lived a couple months after that. So anyone else? I remember when I went away for treatment, I thought that I was just sort of stressed about some immediate things. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go for 30 days and then I'm going to work hard. We're going to get through it. Everything's going to be fine. And then at the end of 30 days, we had uncovered all this other stuff. And I went, okay, fine, I'll stay for another 30 days and we'll work hard and we'll get through it. 4.5 months later, I finally was able to come home, or felt comfortable coming home. I could have left at any time, but I finally thought, okay, now we've done all the work that needs to be done. But a lot of it was dragging up all kinds of things from my past that I either hadn't thought about or forgotten about or didn't consider relevant that turned out they were. And so that was kind of this, like that whole process, like peeling back the layers of an onion until you get down to the root of it. And that can take a long time and you can find some pretty other yucky stuff on the way. So I'm going to pull up the, I'm going to try to pull up the Bible passage. There we go. There it is. Okay. And I was wondering if somebody, actually this time I would love for either one or two people to read it all the way through, and then we'll go back and take it in chunks, because this is one of those where you don't really have a lot of context until you go all the way through, and then I can give you a bigger context and then we can focus in on parts, and it's going to make a lot more sense that way. So who wants to read this? If we want to share, we can break it at, let me see down here. We can break it at verse 8, and somebody else can pick up at 9.
Well, I don't mind reading it.
Okay.
I'll read off the screen.
Oh,
Well, the screen shows the start. Oh, here we go.
oh. Then I saw the Lamb open one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out as with the voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow, a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature call out, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people would slaughter one another. And he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a black horse. Where did it go?
Uh-oh.
Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence. and by the wild animals of the earth.
Do you want to pick? Oh, go ahead. You can keep going.
No, I'm glad for somebody else to take it.
Somebody
take
else. Okay.
And we're on 9, right?
Yeah.
When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God and for the testimony they had given. They cried out with a loud voice, "Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth?" They were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number would be complete, both of their fellow servants and of their brothers and sisters who were soon to be killed, as they themselves had been killed. When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and there came a great earthquake. The sun became a sackcloth, the moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree drops its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll rolling up itself, and every mountain and every island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the magnates and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?"
Thanks be to God for the good news. This is a rather graphic chapter in Revelation. I wanted to read it all the way through because this is a good time and a good way to place the entire book really in context, because we've been hearing about series of things. First the 4 horsemen, and then the 4, and then the seals and stuff like that. So first of all of these are symbols. Like, this is one great big metaphor, because some things are so big and so different, and we can't wrap our heads around that. The only way we can explain them is through poetry or metaphor. And you see that in other areas of life as well. But the thing about this is we tend to think of it as sequential. So it's not that the conquest is followed by violence and then economic disaster and then widespread death, which is how it reads. There's a difference in writing something with words and writing music. So in music, you can have several lines that all happen at the same time. Like as you sing the song, you recognize they're all kind of happening at the same time. But with words, you have to do it in a sequence. And so the 7-fold sequence here isn't chronological. It's not like this happens and this happens and this happens. It's an exposition, a revealing of a 7-fold reality, sort of like those layers on an onion. It's not this sort of timeline of how the end of the world is going to come. It's this sense of, this is how the world is now. This is what God is doing. And we're going to get to this when we move on to, there's a next, so the Revelation's divided into 5 or 3 kind of groups. I'm sorry, 4 groups. So you get 1 through 7 here. And then there's this other subsequent sequence, this other sequencing that happens in 8 through 11. And then there's this other sequence that happens in 12 and 13, and then all the way to 19. So we can't assume that the stuff in 1 through 7, in the chapters 1 through 7, happens before what happens in 8 through 11. It's kind of like all of these things are happening at the same time, which sounds confusing and overwhelming, but we know from real life that lots of things happen at the same time, and it can get confusing and overwhelming. So that's kind of, and each of these sequences are, is sort of a different way of looking at things. It's just a different angle. So like if you stand right in front of something, you see it one way. If you walk around to the side, you see it another way, and you might see different things. If you look at it from above, you get a different picture than if you're right in front of it. And so what we're looking at is this complex reality, which is life, basically. And we're looking at it from different perspectives. And I know in my own life, and I would imagine in yours, that sometimes a change in perspective helps you understand something better, or figure out maybe what to do about something. But we all learn from it, from a change in perspective. So so in verses 1-7, they're laying out or chapters 1-7, they're laying out kind of this sevenfold opening of reality. So they're kind of laying out, here's the problem. And then, and so when we look at that, those same problems, like, so we'll see in chapter 7 that we're looking at the wickedness of humanity in its full extent. And in chapter 7, we learn that God is bringing us safely through that. So all of this destruction and wrath and, horses of death and, slaughtering and all of that. In the next chapter, we see how God is bringing his people safely through. But then in the sequence of chapters 8-11, God's answer is to allow these forces to do their worst so that God can establish God's kingdom finally and over the world. So his kingdom can come fully and finally. And then if we look again from the chapters 12 and 13, we see the full depth and horror of the problem. It gets worse before it gets better. And God's answer to that is going to be to inflict on this rebellious world the equivalent of what happened in Egypt, in order to likewise bring his people free, and finally judging and overcoming those dark powers that have enslaved us for so long, that have kept us from living as fully redeemed human beings into our humanity and the people God created us to be. So this is all, like, we can read these chapters and go, oh my gosh, it's sort of like a horror movie that's going to have a happy ending. Like, you're watching this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, it can't get worse. Or I don't even want to know what happens next. And it just kind of keeps going. And then at the end, it kind of all resolves itself. I say that so we don't get kind of caught up in what order are things happening in. And if there's some kind of symbolism to that, there's symbolism all over the place in here, but it's not about the timeline. This isn't a chronological story, to say. So I think that's important to go through here, because things, as we talked about at the beginning, things have to be exposed before they can dealt with. The surgeon has to know the extent of the problem before they open the person up, and sometimes they still find something they weren't expecting. Ancient or old memories we have of guilt or grief or pain have to be raked up, however painfully, before they can be worked through and healed. A friend of mine who does grief counseling says the only cure for grief is to grieve. There is no sticking a Band-Aid on it and moving on. You don't get through grief until you grieve your way through it. And so this book is really this kind of cosmic version of God's answer, to a deeply troubled soul. The soul of the world is full of immediate problems and pain, if we can think of the world as having a soul. But until we look deeper, all those ancient patterns of conquest and violence and oppression and death, like, you read the Bible and I think, oh my gosh, that's happening now. All of those ancient patterns, until we look at those and seriously consider those, we can't understand what needs to be done to be healed. And so we can maybe patch it over for a few years, but we can't understand what needs to be done in order to be healed. And so the part of Revelation is God sort of yanking back all the layers of the onion and laying them out and going, okay, here's what it looks like. Now let's put it back together in a way that makes it whole and complete and new. Again, there's rotten spots. We're peeling it all out. We have to see if you ever have like a hole in an onion, like that little, rotten spot, and you're peeling back layers because you got to figure out where did it start. And that's sort of what we're getting in here. God is kind of peeling back all these layers of reality and the brokenness of the world and laying them all out so that they can be made whole and then put back together. So for too long, which is at least the last century, mainline Western churches, which is to say most of us, have healed the wounds of the human race lightly. And we hear that in Jeremiah, I think, where the people cry, peace, peace, and there is no peace, except on the superficial level. So often in church conflict, we don't deal with the real problem. We just kind of let it simmer. And as long as everybody seems to be getting along okay, there's not really a problem, but there is, and it will bubble back up over and over and over again. So how can we, as Christians, begin to look below the surface and help each other find deeper healing? What are things we can do to help look below the surface and help each other find deeper healing?
I think we as a society have gotten so insular that that's a very difficult task. We keep our problems to ourselves. We don't talk about our family to other families. And even when something happens that informs those around us that there's a problem, we just kind of wish it away. That's a hard one because we don't really know what specific problems our neighbors are having. We know what we have, and probably they're very similar to and have the same origins as ours. I guess the first step is to treat them in a way that they know that you're there for them and that what they tell you is going to be between them and you. I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
It takes a lot of courage to be vulnerable, which is to let people see and know kind of what's going on internally. And we all don't need to hang our dirty laundry out, for the whole neighborhood to see, because that's not safe. Not everybody is going to hold that information in the way they should. But both being people that are safe for other people to come to, who aren't going to judge, who aren't going to, gossip, all of those things. And then also being people who are willing to share a little more of ourselves than we might, normally do. Nobody wants to see that, nobody wants anyone to see that there might be problems. And some of that's our own discomfort with problems. Like if you have problems, then I have to think about my problems. So I really don't want to know about your problems because I really don't want to know about mine. And I might be reminded of that. I see that a lot in people who have terminal illness, and it's nobody wants to talk to them because in talking to somebody about their own death, we're reminded of ours, like we're all going to die. But we don't like to think about that, which is fair. But so it's like people avoid the people who are grieving or who asking about that, because then we're reminded of our own problems. And I think sometimes trying to avoid our own problems leads us to disconnect from each other and to isolate, like Bob, you were saying.
And I think one of the things that I found though too is like sometimes the best way to make somebody else comfortable sharing is to share something of yourself that makes you vulnerable. And like you said, Christy, that's the hard, that can be very difficult too. But I think often that's a way that you can, it's trust building, right? Is one of the ways that we can, show trust to other people, and then make them feel like they can trust us as well.
I see a lot of the struggle with it on kind of a broader level in the world today. I mean, in whole social systems like homelessness, for example. We're going to give people food and shelter and blankets and all of that. But what we're not going to look at is how do we participate in systems that keep people homeless? Like, why do we have homelessness? And we come through all kinds of things to get around that, like, well, they didn't want to work, or they're mentally ill, or whatever. But, at some point you go into, okay, why do we have work environments where people can't work, where it's, they're not being paid enough to work? Why do we not have mental health care where these people who are mentally ill can be treated in a way that they can live in society? And somehow, why don't we have support systems in place? And what is it that we do in our lives with our little blinders on that, we go, okay, we're helping the homeless, but what we're really doing is helping them in the immediate term. And very few people dig deeper enough or are willing to go, okay, what's the root of this problem? Because we might be part of that. And I know I don't like to think that way. We've seen a lot of that coming out in the focus on racism recently too, that we enjoy a lot of privilege as white people that we don't always recognize. And so, but rather than do that, we just sort of try to make these sort of band-aids of, equal opportunity and that kind of thing, without wanting to recognize all the ways that the deck is stacked against minorities in this country. So I see that too, even beyond just, I think the things that we affect us individually are even affect us socially. And a lot of it is we don't want to peel our own onions back far enough to see where they meet somebody else's. So does anyone else have anything to say or to say to that?
I just think that the psychological scarring that's occurring right now to children with all this masking, and if I was a child and I couldn't understand, why are we all wearing masks? Are you going to make me sick? It's got to be affecting these children a lot more than it is us. I mean, mentally. I feel sorry for them. I don't know. Maybe it's just the opposite. Maybe they're not worried about it like we are as adults. But
that's a really interesting point. I was just like yesterday reading this study about the impact of the pandemic on children, especially, and it's children, especially the really young ones, children are very resilient, and they don't really. It's just, okay, we wear masks because everybody wears masks, and some of them don't even remember not wearing masks. Where they're getting anxiety from is us, because we're not adapting well to a pandemic, which is understandable. It's very stressful and it's scary, but our anxiety is kind of, many of you have already raised children, but as we're raising children, they're picking up on our anxiety. If we could manage ourselves better, they wouldn't know there's anything to be anxious. I mean, it would just be like, okay, here's what we're going to do. But when people you see all of these adults engaging in all of these just vitriolic conversations about masking and not masking and vaccinations, and it's all political and all of this. And that's what's damaging the children, is how we're behaving. Which isn't very well most of the time. So they're doing all kinds of studies in that direction, because it affects everyone. It's a generational trauma. Nobody who's walked through this will ever be the same, and the world will never be the same after this. But it's one of those demarcation lines, and it's instead of like, in our country, 9/11 was a big demarcation line, right? You can remember before and after, but the people born after don't really remember. I mean, they have no idea what it was like. Except this one is a demarcation like that, but it's worldwide, which is what makes it different from the usual ones. We all, not we all can remember, but most people of a certain age have a memory where they were when JFK was assassinated, and what the world was like before and what the world was like after. But that's unique to Americans. This is something that everybody around the world will have this sharp line in their history of before and after. But the children being born today are only afters. They're not going to even know. It's going to be something we talk about. I guess it was last year, maybe the year before, Abigail was studying the Great Depression in school. And she had the ability. Bill's grandmother is still alive. She's about to turn 97. And so she could call up Gigi Mom is what we call her. She could call up Gigi Mom because Gigi Mom was 8 years old when the stock market crashed. Or now she was 4 or 5. She was old enough to remember before and then what the Great Depression was like and then afterwards. And to hear that conversation, but of course, Abigail has no idea what it was like before or even what it was like during, because the world has always been the way she knows it. And I just think it's so interesting. And I see that in Revelation a lot too. It's like, here's this before and after, but how you see it depends on your point of view. Were you there before? Were you there during? Were you there after? What does it look like? And so that's an interesting point, Lewis, especially in context of this chapter. We're gonna go back and visit. We're going to go back and reread. So we have these 5 horsemen. Or I'm sorry, 4 horsemen. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse have made their entry. And then we switch in the seal in 5. Or no, I'm sorry. We have 5 horsemen of the apocalypse. How did that happen? And then, wait, where are we? I've lost my place. Sorry. I can only see part of the screen when I'm doing this. So, okay, then when we go to the 5th seal, okay, we do have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I didn't lose my count. When we go to the 5th seal, we get something different. So can somebody reread us verses 9 through 11, I guess it is.
I'll read that.
Okay.
When he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God and for the testimony they had given. They cried out with a loud voice, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth? They were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer, until the number would be complete, both of their fellow servants and their brothers and sisters, who were soon to be killed as they themselves had been killed.
So under the altar, what John sees is those who have died basically by persecution for the word of God. So we're going to talk about this a little on Sunday. The vast majority of the prophets are going to end up under the altar there. We see that even in our world. Martin Luther King Jr., a lot of the people who have tried to point the way to a deeper truth end up being persecuted or killed for their testimony. And so we hear them, they cry out, Sovereign Lord, how long? How much longer do we have to wait for you to justify us, for you to justify our sacrifice, for you to redeem us, for you to make what we did worth something, that it wasn't just all in vain? And they're given a white robe and told to wait a little longer. And then that last verse is until the number would be complete, both of their fellow servants and of their brothers and sisters who were soon to be killed as they themselves had been killed. So John knows that the persecution is going to continue. John knows this because he's in exile on the Isle of Patmos. So he is indeed already being persecuted. And this is part of just the history of God's people, but also going forward. And so there's this long tradition. It goes back to the Psalms and to the prophets and the children of Israel, even in Egypt, when they were still in captivity, crying out to God to do something for once. Like, finally, could you just do something at last? How long? How long must we wait for you to appear? And that cry echoes down through the centuries. It's heard again as the fifth seal is opened. And so I want to ask us to think through or imagine, how is that cry echoed in our own day, in our families, in our churches, in the world around us? How do we hear the cry of how long, O Lord?
Yes, we hear that all the time. Again, in our race relations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's the main one that I think of.
Say that again, Bob.
I think that's the main one that I think of, the how long, how long has it been and how long will it be?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they're kind of waiting. We all are waiting in a way,
Mm-hmm.
waiting just like these martyrs are waiting. The thing that's going through my mind is the concept of time, though. I mean, time is definitely something that is a part of our thought process, a part of our being, but I'm not so sure if it is of those that are at the foot of the altar. I don't know. Maybe someday I'll find out.
I'm sure someday we all will, one way or another.
Yeah.
I believe this has been the concern of every generation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good point, Lewis. How long until it gets fixed? And there's different it's in every generation too, which goes back to what we were saying earlier. It's this kind of peeling back of all these layers, and every time we think we've gotten to the root, there's one more. And what we hear John talking about in Revelation is God's process of kind of laying that all out, but that takes so much time. And it's a hard process. It's hard to see the effects of our how longness. I get some comfort in that, in knowing that I am not the only one, right? Like, there are people in God's throne room who are going, they're right there with God going, how long? How much longer? And so it gives some context, I think, to my how longs, that not only am I not the only one dealing with it here on earth, that there are people in the throne room of God also going, okay, any day now would be great. Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
Always made me think of, a lot of people, I don't know what percentage the name Adam and Eve
Mm-hmm.
are given to children, but
Yeah.
makes you think back to original sin.
Yep.
And
We've been waiting a long time.
I just read that verse 10 again, and I see it in a different light. So they cried out with a loud voice, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth. So it's as though their enemy, the other side, them are those that are still left on earth. And they're not going to be satisfied until those who are left on earth have been avenged with their blood.
Having read some commentaries on that, you're getting at something there. And I kind of tried to say it up front. Part of their how long is how long till you vindicate our sacrifice? How long, like we were faithful, we told the truth, we got killed for it. How long till you show everyone we were right? Like we told, basically, how long till you show everyone you were right? You told us what to do. You told us what to say. We did it. It didn't end well for us, yet it was still the truth, holy and true, oh God. How long till you show everyone else that it's the truth too? And so it's that judgment is on all the inhabitants of the earth, except they're waiting to be complete with their brothers and sisters. So there's the sense that there's this larger group coming, and the vengeance, and it's avenging their blood, not necessarily killing all the other people on earth. So it's avenging their sacrifice, not necessarily killing other people, but this sort of, when are you going to reveal yourself for who you are and what you want for the world on the inhabitants of the earth? Like we tried to do that. Nobody would listen. Other people are going to try to do that. Nobody's going to listen to them. When are you going to show them? Like, when are you going to make it happen? And that idea too, that I think of when you said that, Bob, is that they're not going to be the last people that we kill because we don't want to hear the truth or face it. There's this sense that this is going to, remember, this was written 2,000 or so years ago, and here we are still killing martyrs. Like, obviously we haven't learned, and that cry goes on, even among martyrs today, I think. So we're going to move to the very next seal, seal 6. And I'm going to ask somebody if they'll read 12 and 13 again for us.
Okay. When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and there came a great earthquake. The sun was black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree drops its winter fruit when shaken by a gale.
Okay, get 14 too. Sorry.
The sky vanished like a scroll rolling itself up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place.
So it asks what series of events, but we just read them. What I want to ask is, does this sequence of events remind you of anything else in Scripture? So that's a clue. The answer is yes.
Yeah. Jesus was crucified.
Mm-hmm. So we hear that, this is what we hear when we read the different crucifixion accounts. There was a great earthquake and it became black as night, and, the stars were gone, all of that stuff. The other place it shows up is when Jesus is actually predicting his crucifixion. The disciples say, how are we going to know what time it is that, God's kingdom is going to break into the earth? And he says, not the time, but here are the signs. There's going to be an earthquake, and the blood's going to be like moon, and the stars are going to darken and fall to the earth. And certainly, and Jesus talks about when the fig tree drops its fruit. And so we hear that. And Jesus' words harken all the way back to Joel, the prophet Joel, who says that in those days, says the Lord, I will bring my salvation to all people through fire and blood, and these are the signs. We read that, it's Joel 2, we read that at Pentecost almost every year. Your young will have visions and your old will dream dreams, and everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Joel mentions all of this stuff too. So we've got this reiteration. Now we're on, 4 times or so where this has happened. And so this sequence, that 6th seal, is this reminder and sign of the inbreaking of God's kingdom. Like, this is all part of God's kingdom. Doesn't look like it, doesn't sound like it, but it's coming. I want to talk just a little bit about symbolism. We talked about it before, so in the ancient world, a lot of people saw eclipses and earthquakes and shooting stars as signs and portents. It was a sign something was coming or whatever. And John could be perfectly fine with people continuing to hear those echoes. But in the Old Testament, when when Joel talks about the sun turning black and the moon becoming blood and the stars falling from heaven, it was a way of speaking about things that even today we would call earth-shattering events. And so obviously we don't literally mean that the planet broke into pieces. And so John doesn't mean actual earthquakes or the sun as dark and the moon as blood. But when we say things like something was an earth-shattering event, we tend to talk about tumultuous events like the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Twin Towers on 9/11, those things that we have hard time finding appropriate language for, except through this kind of vivid symbolism and imagery. And so we hear that, and that's an important way to think about as we read this. This isn't because there are some Christians who take this quite literally, and so they're always looking at astrological phenomenon and geological phenomenon to say, oh look, here's a sign, God is coming. And really, all this is symbolism, where John is really trying to say the inbreaking of God's kingdom is by definition going to be an earth-shattering event. It's going to be one of those things where there's this strong demarcation of before and after. And when those kind of things happen, we often don't have the language to speak about them really adequately. So. In verse 15, we get to the rest of that. It says, then the earth and the magnates and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone slave and free hid the caves among the rocks, calling to them, fall on us and hide us from one seated on the throne. So why do you think that the rich and the powerful and the kings of the earth are singled out among all the people who hide in the caves?
I think it makes the point that everybody's going to be judged. Everybody's going to be subject to this great apocalypse, if you will. That power and wealth and those things are not going to shield you.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll be in there in the caves right along with the rest of us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think.
I like your think, Bob. Does anyone else want to add to that?
We symbolize this. When we dropped the atom bombs on Japan in World War II, that's the closest thing I can imagine to all of this.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent analogy, Lewis. I had not thought of that one, but I think that's probably right for the people who were living in Japan at the time. I mean, this literally changed their lives in dramatic and violent and horrible ways.
And they still, after we dropped the first one, they still weren't sure they're going to give up. And the emperor decided they'd give up.
I think on the other side of that, we weren't satisfied until they gave up. I think of the difference in the cost of the havoc that got wreaked by the atom bomb versus the cost of lives in war. And I think this is one of the few cases where the act of war there caused more damage than continuing in the war might have in terms of lives. It was just, that was not humanity's finest moment in any sense.
Well, that's why
I look at Europe
because they said it would cost us more lives if we didn't do it.
and them. It would cost them more lives. You know, you look at Europe prior to that and the destruction that was wreaked on the entire continent, and when you add Hiroshima and Nagasaki together with all the people that died of things like radiation poisoning later on, it still was in the hundreds of thousands. You're talking millions and millions and millions of people that died as a result of the conflict in the European continent. So, I know that bomb looked bad, and what it did was bad, obviously, but I think had it gone the other way, where we would have had to enter that island nation and defeat it militarily, I think that the civilian population would have suffered far more. That's just my point of view. I'm not trying to justify the decision to do it.
I think that's a good example of the brokenness of the world, that we have to make decisions like that.
Right.
And there's really no good decision, right? Like, it doesn't matter which decision you pick, damage is going to occur and people's lives are going to be lost, and fallible human beings are somehow in charge of that.
Absolutely.
One of many reasons why human beings should not play God. So it goes on. So it talks about hiding, that people hiding are most afraid of the combination of the creator's gaze. So they're hiding so that hide us from, I'm sorry, I can't see my own stuff. Hang on. Hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne and the wrath of the Lamb. So this sense of hiding, not just from the gaze of the creator's gaze, but also the Lamb's wrath. And so there's this deep mystery, because we heard about the Lamb earlier and the Lamb's sacrifice. And so just as John talks to us about seeing the lion in the terms of the Lamb a couple chapters ago, he talks about the Lion of Judah and then the Lamb. And so we're interpreting what power means by the description of the Lamb. The notion of wrath is also redefined because of the fact that it's the Lamb's wrath. So the whole idea of wrath is defined when it's Jesus' wrath. And so how does our idea of the wrath of God change if we realize that it belongs to the one who has embodied in his own death God's self-giving sacrificial love? How does that change our idea of what God's wrath is if we recognize that it belongs to Christ, who sacrificed himself as a means of showing God's self-giving and sacrificial love?
That's a hard one. You want to restate the question?
So if we think about wrath, we're looking at something called the Lamb's wrath. So that wrath belongs to Christ, who sacrificed himself as a way of showing God's all-encompassing infinite love for humanity. So how does that change the way we might think of God's wrath?
So I'll hazard a thought, and I'm not going to say it's an answer, but it's part of where my brain gets stuck, and maybe we can work from there. To me, I think it's well, I guess where my brain stops working is I don't want to go to universalism, if that makes sense, because I think there still is judgment, but I think it all is like, okay, Jesus came to earth for us to show us love, which we should show to others. So what wrath is there, right? That's where my brain kind of gets broken. But
yeah, my brain is broken too, and I'm having a hard time sorting out the difference in God's love and God's wrath. Now I know that I could be very, very angry with Parker, and that certainly did not detract at all from my love for him. Even though I was angry, and I might levy some fines on him as a result, for my anger or for what he did, it's never so drastic that he's not going to recover from it, and hopefully learn from it.
Or so drastic that it's going to break your love for him.
Right. Or for myself.
Yeah. That's most of it. I mean, there's a paradox here. I mean, I think you really, in terms of real life terms, hit the nail on the head with that one, Bob. One of the things Karl Barth talked about, so he was a theologian in the 30s and 40s in Nazi Germany. He was one of the resistors, and he wrote about a couple of things. One of the things he said was, sort of this redefining of predestination. So in the Presbyterian Church, we think God saved some and God damns some. And we don't know who that is, but Karl Barth said, God has the ability to condemn some people for all eternity. But the limit of God's wrath is God's love. And so the limit of God's forgiveness is the limit of God's love. So, yes, God could damn some people for all eternity, but it's more in God's nature to forgive for all eternity, and to continue to give us chances over and over again to be the kind of people that God has called us to be. Bart also said, we know we have a judge. We all have a judge, but we know who the judge is, and it's Christ. And so we can see what that judgment looks like. And it's pretty gracious. So we hear, we often invoke God's wrath upon all kinds of things and other people, and God's judgment on all of other people. And we forget that perhaps that wrath and judgment doesn't just apply to them, it applies to us too. And it's in everyone's best interest to see it as forgiveness and love. So, and I think you lifted that up, Bob. It's not that God just has given us a pass and Jesus says, oh yeah, do whatever, right? But even when God is angry with us, God loves us and wants us to do well, and to come back to God. And so I think you really nailed that one, Bob. Thank you for sharing that wisdom in a real life analogy. So the last question is, or statement is the only people who should be afraid of the Lamb's wrath are those who are determined to resist the call of love. In what ways might we respond to the call of love in the way of the Lamb in our lives? So how might we respond to the call of Jesus' love in our lives, or the call of love through Christ, however you want to think about it?
Well, as Christians, we accept him as our Redeemer.
Mm-hmm.
And only way I would think, well, people who deny Christ, that's the problem. You really got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think to me, the way, one of the ways we can respond to the call, I mean, just to make sure I've got the question right, how we can respond to the call of God's love through Christ, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is to go and love others. You know, in the biblical agape, whatever sense. And also to hear that call, you have to be with others to hear that call.
I think Jesus said something about that, Peter, if I'm remembering correctly.
But I think the greatest commandment was to love God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that loving God will then allow us to love others. And to, you know, if we're looking for the key that opens the door and lets us in, I would say that would be the one that would open the door, but then there's a lot more work to be done.
Yeah, in Jesus' commandment, he says the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength. And the second is like it. So he actually equals them out, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. Because like you pointed out, Bob, we can't really love our neighbor unless we love God. If we're not loving our neighbor, we're not loving God. And if we're really loving God, we have no other choice than to love our neighbor too. You can't split those apart without one of them not being true. And so I hear this too. I was listening, I was thinking about this statement. The only people who should be afraid of the Lamb's wrath are those who are determined to resist the call of love. And we think, oh, of course not. I'm not, you know, I'm not going to resist the call of love, but I think about times where the call of love asks us to do hard things that we might not want to do. Whether that's to speak the truth, whether that's to open our hearts and minds to learn something new or to meet someone we've, you know, to rethink somebody we've written off, or to, you know, set a boundary. You know, those are all things that we might be doing to be called in love, but we resist them because they're hard and scary. And I think that's when it's the most helpful, or I feel like in my own life, that's when it's the most helpful to remember that those things are the call of the Lamb, and the wrath of the Lamb is really a call to repentance, to be more like God in Christ. And so that even when God is judging us, God is doing it in love, and everything kind of points to that. And so while I might resist the call of love, God is going to keep calling. Anyone else have anything they want to add, or anything that jumped out at them about this passage, or any other questions that they might have? I went and did all this searching because George asked me about that word conquer, and I'm going to stop sharing here so that I can see you all better. And then he's not here today. So I can either wait and dissertate on that the next time, or I can share it now and we can invite George to see lots of research. We can invite, it's not as long as it looks, we can invite George to watch it later. So it ties in really well with some of the things we've talked about tonight with metaphor and symbolism, but I'll leave that up to you guys, whether you want to hear about that word conquer that keeps coming up over and over and over again, or whether we want to wait until George is back with us, since he's the one who asked the question.
I'd like to wait here
Okay.
with George.
Okay, that sounds good. Alrighty, in that case, I'm going to invite us to pray, and then we can stop recording and share any personal prayer requests we might have. So let us pray. Lord, we hold before you all of those throughout the world who are terrorized by war, famine, disease, poverty, persecution, and injustice of all kinds. We cry out with those who suffer, how long, O Lord? And we entrust them to your care as God, who is somehow present in the midst of all of these terrors, lovingly working to make all things new. Through Christ our Lord, we pray. Amen.